Hi, I'm Naveen Day. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump's mugshot was released on Thursday evening after he was booked at an Atlanta jail on more than a dozen felony charges. Nearly 400 people are still listed as unaccounted for after this month's devastating wildfires on Maui. And floats and displays of all shapes, colors, and sizes paraded down the streets of Tabor to kick off their annual Corn Fest.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News.
Thanks so much for joining us. It took 20 minutes for former U.S. President Donald Trump to be booked, pose for a mugshot, and post a $200,000 bond at a jail in Atlanta, where he is being charged illegally with scheming to overturn the 2020 election in Georgia.
I'm Mike Balsamo. I'm the U.S. law enforcement editor for the Associated Press. The Fulton County Sheriff's Office has released a mugshot of former President Donald Trump, who surrendered to authorities after being indicted in Atlanta in connection with an indictment that charged him and several of his associates with trying to subvert the results of the 2020 presidential election. This is a historic moment in American history. It's the first time that a booking photo has been released of a former president, and Donald Trump is the first former president to be criminally charged. And this is the first time, despite 4 separate indictments, that we are seeing a booking photo, a mugshot of the former president.
Now, it is not clear if Donald Trump will have to make another trip to Georgia in the weeks ahead to be arraigned. It is a possibility that it could take place virtually if the judge permits, or Trump's arraignment could be waived. The FBI has put together a list of 388 people still missing following the fires that swept across the Hawaiian island of Maui more than 2 weeks ago. The number of confirmed dead stands at 115, but that is expected to rise. Officials were concerned that by releasing a list of the missing, they would also be identifying some people who may have died.
It can and will cause pain for some folks that are affected by this. This is not an easy thing to do, but we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can possibly to make this investigation the most complete, thorough to date. Therefore, the validated list has a criteria. It's very simple. It's a first and last name and a point of contact of who provided that name.
Just hours after officials issued an update saying the next 2 days would be critical in the fight against wildfires in the Northwest Territories, 2 new fires were reported. In the last 24 hours, 2 fires in the North Slave region, which encompasses the communities of Yellowknife and Betchico, were ignited, bringing the total number of active blazes in the region to 90. The legislature is set to reconvene for one day on Monday to deal with the fallout from the fire, including getting relief aid to more than 2/3 of the territory's residents who have been forced to evacuate. Some communities are without phone and/or cell service because of the wildfires. The premiers of Alberta and the Northwest Territories toured a reception center for wildfire evacuees in Calgary today. Tens of thousands have been forced from the territory, with many seeking refuge in Alberta.
Over the past week, we've gained 21,576 temporary residents, and Albertans are very proud to help. I'd also like to thank everyone from the Calgary Emergency Management Agency for their tireless efforts in setting up and running this evacuation centre, and for the support that they offer daily to the evacuees from Yellowknife. Alberta's healthcare system has assisted in the evacuation of 4 hospitals and is serving the healthcare needs of 4 acute care patients, 55 continuing care patients, 30 obstetrics patients, and 19 dialysis patients. And so to our frontline healthcare workers, thank you.
68% of our population has been evacuated. Many of the people in the north have never left the north. They're not familiar with big cities. I know it's a struggle. But I can't express how thankful I am to Premier Smith, to the government, to the Alberta, for firefighters, for evacuation centres, for supports, and the people of Alberta. Myself, I had to evacuate as well. And the amount of people that were standing on the roads, giving out gift cards, opening their homes, handing out water and things. I can't express how much gratitude and how much it meant to us.
The Central Okanagan Emergency Operations Center has rescinded all evacuation orders within Kelowna city limits, as well as those for more than 300 properties in the district of Lake Country. However, officials say evacuation orders are still in effect in parts of West Kelowna, West Bank First Nation, and Lake Country. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau visited areas in BC damaged by wildfires. He met with firefighters, volunteers, and officials, and he said he's heard extraordinary stories of heroism from those on the ground in BC's Okanagan region. Meanwhile, wildfires continue to rage in other parts of British Columbia, including the Stein Mountain blaze near Lytton, which is now close to 33 square kilometers in size. There are currently about 368 active wildfires across the province, with 149 classified as out of control and 14 qualified as fires of note for their visibility and threat to populated areas. Forecasters continue to monitor the progress of Tropical Storm Franklin as it slowly gathers steam in the western Atlantic Ocean. The Nova Scotia government is launching an advertising campaign urging residents to prepare for hurricane season.
We do expect that the storm will gradually take over a more northerly track, probably over the weekend. The storm should enter our response zone probably early next week, followed by another turn towards the northeast, so another right-hand turn. That right-hand turn is going to be very critical in determining if the storm tracks closer to the Maritimes or a storm that brings it, the turn is a lot sharper, it might keep the center of the storm offshore.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he doesn't believe anything criminal happened in removing lands from the protected Greenbelt for housing. A report from the Auditor General found that developers who owned 15 sites of land that the government removed from the Greenbelt last year now stand to see those properties rise in value by $8.3 billion. Ford says he doesn't micromanage the people that work for him.
Let me tell you very simply, and it goes for any premier, you get stuff put in front of you before cabinet, which I did. My exact words, cross the T's, dot the I's, everything's fine. I can't micromanage one of the largest, I call it a corporation, one of the largest corporations in North America of $204 billion of revenue, hundreds of thousands of employees, a GDP over $1 trillion, and micromanage every single person. I don't believe in micromanaging. I believe in delegating work through our ministers and their teams.
A clean energy think tank says Alberta's pause on approvals for new renewable energy projects is affecting 118 projects worth $33 billion of investment. In a new report, the Pembina Institute says those projects would create enough jobs to keep 24,000 people working for a year. NDP MLA for Sherwood Park and critic for municipal affairs, mid-sized municipalities and rural Alberta, Kyle Kozowski says the effects of the pause are being felt province-wide.
The projects are spread out across the province, from as far north as Peace River down to southern part of the province near the U.S. border. In our neck of the woods, projects proposed for Fort Saskatchewan, Edmonton, Wetaskiwin, and Wabamun have been impacted by this senseless moratorium. And all those companies and organizations developing or buying these projects are diverse with unique business objectives. Everything from long-time renewable energy companies to municipalities to oil and gas companies and First Nations that are looking to pursue renewable energy. These stalled projects represent at least $13 billion in investment.
In an emailed statement to Bridge City News, Minister of Affordability and Utilities Nathan Neudorf said projects that have already been approved or conditionally approved will not be impacted by the moratorium. Mounties in southern Alberta are investigating the theft of 6 longhorn cattle. Strathmore RCMP and the Southern Alberta Livestock Investigations Unit say the animals were removed from a pasture near Highway 564 and Range Road 262. It's believed that the cattle were loaded and hauled away using a truck and a trailer. The cattle are described as a mix of red and black steers and heifers weighing around 600 pounds each. They had purple management tags on their ears but were not branded. If you have any information about this theft, contact RCMP Livestock Investigations at 403-701-1462 or call Crime Stoppers. Tabor Corn Fest kicked off in style on Thursday evening with the annual parade. Over 80 floats participated this year with colorful streamers and pom-poms waving in the wind. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains, Cornfest has a rich history in the southern Alberta area.
It was 48 years ago that Cornfest first started in the town of Taber, and now it's known as one of the largest family festivals in Western Canada. One of the biggest attractions for the event is the annual parade, which included some spooky sights as the folks from Creepy Hollow in Warner, Alberta came out for some hair-raising fun.
I remember this float has been the float for years and years and years, ever since I first started coming. We've only updated it a little bit here and there, but it's our little Halloween float with a couple surprises in it. I've been coming to Taber Cornfest for about 14 years. Owners have been coming for a lot longer than that, I believe. Come for the scare if you dare.
Organizers of the event told us what we can expect from Cornfest this year.
We have live entertainment all 3 days. We have free family, it's known as a free family event. So bouncy castles, the laughing loggers will be here. We have the midway, so there's wristband nights for that. And then we have stage entertainment showcasing our local artisans. So a farmer's market, there's just too many things to mention, but just check out our social media and yeah, there's updates all weekend long.
Local dignitaries were also on hand for the Cornfest opening ceremonies.
People can come out, they can taste the food, have a great time, listen to some great music, and enjoy the weather. We've got great weather here in Taber for sure. Southern Alberta's got the best weather.
People so much enjoy being out in their community, seeing their friends, because they missed that. It disappeared for a while. So you see that enthusiasm out there amongst the people. They enjoy being part of their community.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The Lethbridge Police Service are honoring 2 fallen officers this weekend who died while on the job 90 years ago. Sergeant Joseph Bloxage and Constable Joseph Farrell both died in a crash in Fort Macleod, and their deaths were previously unknown to LPS until earlier this year. Regimental Sergeant Major Sean Davis explains how the officers' deaths went unknown for so long.
I think now is we can kind of open the internet and we can open the research up and we can get more access to the GALT and to archives and newspapers that we're able to find out more things that happened. It's just interesting when you start researching, I call it the rabbit hole. You find one little tidbit. Again, we were researching veteran status. Really is all we were looking for. We find out what a collision, we find out what one officer dying. Well, then it ends up being 2, and now it's trying to find out, were they on duty, were they not on duty? Because it was 4 o'clock in the morning.
A memorial ceremony will be taking place on Sunday at the LPS atrium starting at 10:30 a.m. The man van rolled into Lethbridge today in the parking lot of London Drugs. The clinic from the Prostate Cancer Centre in Calgary offers free blood testing to help detect early prostate cancer for men ranging in age from 40 to 80 years old. Mike Budd, the host of the man van and a cancer survivor himself, tells us what a trip to the man van will look like.
The gentleman will answer a few questionnaires in the iPads, about their general health, and then they'll go inside the man van and speak with the technicians and answer some more questions, and then they will take their waist circumference, blood glucose, and then a small vial of blood to do the PSA testing, which we take back to Calgary with us to the Rocky View Hospital, and then we respond back to them with their results for the PSA, and should they have elevated levels of PSA, then what we do is we have somebody to contact them and discuss a possible game plan for them.
Chelsea Kwong, a patient care pharmacist with London Drugs, says this is an important partnership between each organization.
In Canada, men's health is often called like the silent crisis. So men, don't seek preventative care, they delay treatment, they don't listen to health information as much, and they probably don't have a health care provider. So London Drugs is trying to make that more accessible to our patients. PSA, or prostate-specific antigen, is a protein in the blood that can help with the early detection of prostate cancer. And the earlier that prostate cancer is detected, then the more likely it is to be treated and the better the treatment will be.
According to stats from the Prostate Cancer Centre, the man van serves approximately 7,000 men per year. The group also does clinics in different areas in Calgary. For more information on locations, you can visit our website, bridgecitynews.ca. Bill C-47 is a piece of legislation that is affecting the natural health industry in Canada. Coming up, we will chat with Chris Robinson with the Purple Carrot in Lethbridge to discuss its impact and how it may cause health food prices to increase. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you miss any of today's stories, be sure to visit our website, bridgecitynews.ca.
Well, many Canadians live with various health challenges and rely upon natural health supplements to provide relief or even cure certain types of conditions. But every so often, the federal government tries to put restrictions on these supplements, which can be very frustrating for health supplement providers and their clients. To discuss this in more detail, I have Chris Robinson joining me. She's a nutritional consultant and co-owner of Purple Carrot, which is a natural health shop in Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News, Chris. Great to have you on today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so Chris, I understand that the federal bill C-47, which is a large omnibus bill that covers a lot of different stuff, also has a section that basically amends the laws concerning natural health products and gives the federal government more enforcement power. So Health Canada is saying that we need this to better safeguard public health, but there seems to be a lot of natural health stores across Canada who disagree. So what are some of your concerns?
Well, the big thing is where natural health products are being put in the same category as drugs, and they're totally different. And so when you're trying to regulate two totally different things the same, it creates a lot of issues. And so there's quite a few things that are concerning, but I think the biggest thing that's going to affect people, so people watching here, is cost. So there's a whole bunch of new fees that are coming in, and that's going to affect the companies and their ability to continue to create products. But then, so for those companies who don't close, who can afford to make all these changes, for those ones that do stay in business, there has to be some cost recovery for them. So it's cost recovery for the government, which pass on to cost recovery for the companies, which then moves on to us and then the consumers. And so costs are going to go up. We're going to have less product availability. So the companies that are in Canada, again, there's going to be companies that can't afford to continue to produce products. There's going to be less products coming in, so less innovation, which we want. And then there's restrictions on what I can say as a nutritional consultant or working in a health food store. And we already have a lot of regulations in Canada. There's a lot of things I can say, for instance, we cannot say this will cure that. That is illegal. We're not allowed to do that. So we already have a lot of restrictions, and they're going to be putting in even more. And so we're losing freedom of choice. We're losing freedom of expression. And so there's a lot of things that are really concerning with this.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And you mentioned cost. So how likely would you say that prices will go up for consumers, and by how much would they go up, do you think?
I can't imagine them not going up. I can't see a scenario in which they won't if this is allowed to continue to go through. Again, we're looking at the amount of fees that are going in. They're crazy. Import fees, distribution fees, wholesale fees, site license fees, manufacturing fees, packaging fees, labeling fees. And that's just for ones already in Canada. For ones that want to come in, it's even more. And I read some examples of what it can cost companies. And so for small businesses, small manufacturing companies, and there's a lot in Canada, it could cost them anywhere from $60,000 to $200,000 annually. That's every year. And so that cost, again, that has to be given to someone. Somebody
has to be eaten by the consumer in the long run, really.
Yeah. And we're already struggling, right? We already had COVID. So many businesses closed during that. We have inflation and interest rates. I cannot believe our operating costs. And we don't have a huge monster warehouse. Our operating costs every month are going up and up and up. Our prices, when we get our invoices in, they're going up and up and up. I hear my business partner receiving, and she's like, oh my gosh, the prices. And it's already happening. And so when this comes in, and then it makes it unattainable. Supplements are already expensive. Supplements are already a luxury item, which they shouldn't be. and they're going to be even more. So only the wealthy can buy supplements, and that's not fair. That's not what we want.
Yeah, Chris, it sounds like you're joining the chorus of many a business owner with just fighting against the inflationary costs. It's
I've never seen anything like it. I cannot believe our costs and what's happening to them.
It's very, very unfortunate. With regards to this bill, so one complaint that we've heard from health store owners is that there wasn't any advance notice or consultations with stakeholders like yourself.
No, and I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a politician, so how all the parliament works is, not much more beyond what I learned in high school. But it's my understanding that this is a budget bill, and budget bills get pushed through faster. So we only heard about it in April, and it was passed, or the first reading was April 20th. So we had we had no time to do anything before then. And then it was actually passed into law at the end of June. So even between them, there's no time. And this happened in 2008. And there's a lawyer with the Natural Health Products Protection Association, and we won in 2008 when they were trying to do this because we had time to fight back and have our voices heard. So when it's pushed through without input from the industry or without Canadians getting a chance to say, whoa, 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 this is not okay, it's concerning. We had no time.
Yeah, so they kind of snuck this one in under the radar.
Yeah,
that's unfortunate. So, Chris, do you believe that maybe some supplements might not be available in Canada any longer if this is the case?
Yeah, I don't know how that'll look. And what companies, what brands, what will, what won't. We've had a lot of people really afraid that they're not going to be able to get their products, and how quickly. I mean, it sounds like if this does go through, the actual rules sort of come into place in 2025, April of 2025. But from what I know is they're looking at the Canadian Health Food Association did sort of a brand study, and they're saying that 70% of brands figure they'll have to pull at least some product from the shelf. And it's due to, again, the claims we can make. So when health products have been regulated since 2004. And so they can make claims, and we've been able to use traditional use as a claim. So there's so many herbs that have been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. So traditional Chinese medicine, traditional indigenous medicine, traditional herbal medicine. So you can use a claim like parsley has traditionally been used as a diuretic. But now what they're saying is you can't make that claim, or you have to have double-blind placebo studies or follow, again, the same parameters of pharmaceutical medications need to follow to have that product on the market. So you might have a totally wonderful, great, safe product that's allowed in Canada, but you don't have the money to prove this or that or the other. There's new labels that have to be made. So again, if you can't afford to, that product's gone. And so how many products will be affected? I don't know. And we're seeing, unfortunately, that there's a lot of big corporations buying up little supplement companies, which will hopefully save them. But then again, we're getting a monopoly, and we have big companies. And so we're getting less control in our industry. And it's just health food stores and the industry, it's changing from what it should be. It's changing from what it used to be when I got into the industry, like, oh my gosh, decades ago. And it's sad because we will see, again, 70% of brands having to pull their product. There's 1 in 5 brands considering moving out of Canada. And 83% of supplement companies feel like they're not sure if they can withstand the costs of this program.
So, Chris, what do you say to those who might agree with Health Canada that more oversight is needed to protect individuals from adverse reactions to natural health supplements? Because it is true that this can happen similar reactions to pharmaceuticals.
You can absolutely have an adverse reaction from a natural health product. I would argue that similar is probably not the appropriate word. We're comparing apples to oranges. So when we look at the safety of natural supplements, in fact, I read a CTV article yesterday. Actually, Health Canada made a statement on it saying that natural health products are generally very safe and have fewer side effects than pharmaceutical medications. But when we look, and it's actually, I was trying to find some stats for Canada, and I had a really hard time finding stats. But in the United States, pharmaceutical medications are the 3rd leading cause of death behind cancer and heart disease. Natural supplements aren't even on that list. The lawyer who is fighting for us in this right now, his name is Sean Buckley. he was fighting years ago, and he contacted Health Canada looking for information on deaths from natural supplements. And so this was a few years ago. And so they went back to 1965, and they had no records from 1965 until when he asked in the 2000s here, and there were zero records of deaths from natural supplements. And so we can't compare. And maybe there's been a few things since then or that weren't reported, and there can be adverse reactions for sure. But Tylenol kills on average 38 people in Canada per year. They have statistics out of BC where the coroner's reports were doing studies from 2000 to 2010 and found that pharmaceutical overdoses were killing between 140 and 180 per year. And this is like pre-opioid crisis. This is, it's alarming. We can't even compare them. So yes, you can have an adverse reaction. You can get diarrhea from too much vitamin C or magnesium. You can get a flush from niacin. You can be sensitive to the sun from St. John's wort, but they're not even in the same ballpark of safety.
Do you know if hospitals were required in the past to report adverse effects of natural health products like herbal remedies and supplements?
It wasn't anything I really thought about. And then this Vanessa's law came in 2013. And that was part of it. So they're required to report adverse medication reactions. My assumption was always that they did. So I didn't realize they didn't, or there was rules or not rules or what have you. But now they have to, because we fall into that same category. So they lumped us under the Vanessa's law.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe that's why he couldn't find anything dating back to 1965. It seems like a no-brainer that they should report anything if that's what they're finding to be the cause of an adverse effect, right? So because it's a requirement, I believe, if they find adverse effects from pharmaceutical products. So I would think a lot of people would see that as a reasonable measure.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we want everybody to be safe, and as long as I think the biggest thing is as long as they're looking into why. And so Vanessa's law basically gives Health Canada the power to just be like, adverse reaction, pull that product, you're done. And sometimes that can be iffy because we don't know what it is until research is done, right? I mean, yes, we want people to be safe. If somebody dies, we definitely want to pay attention to that. But we've seen Health Canada prematurely pull product before that people needed because they're like, this is scary. And then, so we're not involving court authorization. There's not due process, and we need due process. And so we've seen products pulled before, and then once it goes to the courts and all of the research and testimonials and information is provided, the courts are like, no, this product needs to be on the shelf. But in the meantime, the people that needed that for their mental health or for their heart disease, there's two cases in particular where that happened. They couldn't get it. And people died because of that, because the products were pulled from the market.
We're about out of time here, Chris, but really quickly, since Bill C-47 has already been passed, what can concerned viewers actually do about this now?
We still have to fight. We can't give up. You need to talk to your MP to get sections 500 to 504 pulled out of the bill. So write to your MPs, write to all the MPs, write to the Minister of Health. They've tried this before, and in 2008 we won, and we won by sending letters. They were apparently wheelbarrowing letters into the Minister of Health's office. So we need to do that again. We need to bombard. I get to choose if I eat Kraft dinner or fast food all day or vegetables and fruit. We need to have freedom of choice. And supplements are safe. They've been proven to be safe over and over and over again. And we need to have that choice, and we have to fight. This is really, really important.
Okay. Well, Chris, thanks so much for sharing your concerns on this issue. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you.
Oh, absolutely. Chris Robinson is the co-owner of Purple Carrot, a Lethbridge natural health store.
The truck convoy of 2022 and the subsequent Freedom Rally in Ottawa was something that both Canada and the world had never ever seen before. The Freedom Convoy captured the imaginations and hearts of so many people, millions of people around the world. It was also quite controversial, with many who were against it, leading to the federal government invoking the Emergencies Act. Tamara Leach became one of the central figures of the convoy and Freedom Rally, and she joins us now from her home in Medicine Hat, Alberta, to chat about some of that experience. Tamara, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Now let's go back to January of 2022. This was a completely new experience for Canadians. How did it all really begin for you? What led up to the Freedom Convoy?
Well, I think the convoy itself was a collection of a small group of people that had very similar ideas. For myself, I know that I got involved because I was really upset with the mandates and the restrictions. They were affecting my family, my friends, people that I cared about. And about the time the convoy got started, I recall they were starting to discuss interprovincial travel, restricting interprovincial travel. And of course, I've got a large family spread across the prairie. So that was a pretty huge concern of mine to not be able to see my granddaughter.
You know, some of the comments we heard from a lot of our news teams that we sent out to Ottawa during the Freedom Convoy was how many people were kneeling and praying for your group, praying for the entire Freedom Convoy. What feedback did you hear from those around you about all of the prayer that seemed to surround the event?
Well, I've said right from the beginning that I feel that the whole process, the whole experience itself was divine in that if we needed somebody, they showed up. If we needed somebody with a particular skill set, they showed up. It just happened that everything that happened, there was so many coincidences that they just couldn't be coincidences. And of course, the feedback that we got along the way, traveling across the country and even on the ground in Ottawa, was incredible. Very heartwarming.
Now, you did a lot of work behind the scenes, you and your team. Let's talk about the leadership during that period of time. What was it really like planning leading up to the Freedom Convoy, going all the way across the country, like you said, to Ottawa?
It was busy. I was up early in the morning, usually 5 or 6 in the morning, and going to bed at about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock at night. We were obviously working on many things like hotel rooms and stops and where we were going to get fuel and what was going to be happening when we got on the ground in Ottawa. So there was a small group of us that were in constant communication. And it was so hectic, but very exciting at the same time. And the great thing about it is that a lot of us that started off as strangers, I didn't know any of these people before the convoy, have now become like family.
Now, looking back, do you feel that there were some saboteurs in your midst? I mean, trying to maybe change the course to distract the core of the leadership group. We've even seen on the mainstream media some of the Nazi flags, Confederate flags. Now, do you feel those were actually plants and not part of your group?
Well, I don't know how they showed up. I know they weren't part of our group. It's quite suspect, especially the Nazi flag, how that just showed up one day. And then, as you saw in the mainstream media, that's all they talked about was a Confederate flag and a Nazi flag, and not the hundreds of thousands of Canadian flags that were out there. So it's fairly suspect that that gentleman with that flag showed up one day and then disappeared, and that's all they talked about. And I guess the other thing that I found after or at the inquiry was that they had people like myself and Chris Barber profiled before we even left. So I find it hard to believe that they don't know who that gentleman is.
Now, do you feel that sometimes you had a tough time getting your message across to Canadians through the mainstream media, and that's why you tapped into a lot of independent media, including Bridge City News?
Yes, actually, I don't think the mainstream media got anything right, really. And it really came down to media such as yourselves and other independent media sources and citizen journalists. I think the convoy was really the rise of the citizen journalists because we had all that footage from cell phones.
Now, looking back, Tamara, were there some experiences where maybe you thought, we shouldn't have gone down that road? I mean, we also interviewed a lot of Ottawa business owners who were irate with all of the amount of trucks that were in Ottawa and people trying to get to work. I used to live in Ottawa myself, in Orleans. I used to, work in downtown Ottawa at the Sun News Network. So were there maybe some lessons learned along the way, things you would have done differently, looking back?
Well, that's a whole can of worms, isn't it? I tend to not be kind of a what if person. I believe that everything that happened as it was supposed to happen. There's not too many things I think we could have done differently. To be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what we could have changed at this point.
How about, did you grow as a person as well, compared to when you started with the Freedom Convoy to afterwards, and including what happened with the invokement of the Emergencies Act?
I have much thicker skin.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we all have. I mean, I've always loved my country. I've always been passionate about my country. Have I always been proud of it? Not always, but that's for me what the convoy did was really reignite that Canadian spirit and again showed fundamentally who Canadians are. So I think it changed all of us in some form.
What are your thoughts when the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act?
I was shocked. I was actually shocked. The ironic thing about the invocation of the act was that me, my husband, and our legal team were actually on our way to go see Mr. Brian Peckford when the announcement came over the radio. So it was Keith Wilson that actually informed Mr. Peckford when we arrived that they were going to be invoking the act. And I mean, I was just shocked because there was no violence. There was no violence. Something that should be noted is that protesters and supporters stood outside of the Prime Minister's office every day for 3 weeks. There wasn't so much as a window smashed or graffiti on it or nothing. So yeah, I was really shocked. I thought that was a very heavy-handed tool to be using under the circumstances, especially in light of the fact that the border crossings had already been cleared.
So how do you think this would have played out if Prime Minister Justin Trudeau would have said, okay, Tamara, I want to sit down with you and the leadership group with the Freedom Convoy?
Well, that's hard to say. I think if we would have had any type of indication that they were willing to even listen to us, that we would have started packing up and going home. Because let's face it, after 3 weeks in the middle of winter in Ontario, we were tired, we were exhausted, we were away from our families and our jobs, and I think just a show of good faith would have went a long ways.
How about your thoughts on the public inquiry into the Emergencies Act? I mean, we learned that the Ottawa police really didn't do their job, potentially, and that's why more reinforcements had to be brought in. What are your thoughts with Justice Rouleau's report?
Yeah, that was not a shock, I guess, but still a shock. I think a lot of us expected that outcome, but we had held out hope that it would have been different. What it did basically was say that government incompetence is a reason to invoke the Emergencies Act, and yeah, I was quite disappointed with the results. When we first got to the inquiry, I felt like we were going to be listened to. I thought he was really hearing, the convoy organizers' testimony and taking it all in. And then towards the end of it, it became very clear that um, it wasn't going to be that way. With the shenanigans, I know you've had Eva and Keith and them on your show before. The document dumps late at night, all the redactions, the cabinet confidentiality and parliamentary privilege that was used as an excuse when in reality there wasn't any in some cases. So, yeah, it was disappointing for sure.
Let's talk about some of the money donated through various online media platforms like GoFundMe and GiveSendGo. Did you and your group ever receive much of that funding?
We received the initial million that was released. I believe that was the very end of January. And of course, that was all frozen immediately, pretty much immediately, anyways. GoFundMe ended up refunding everything. And then we started that fundraiser with GiveSendGo. They also ended up refunding most of it. Of course, there was some that was in a payment processor that all that money's tied up in an escrow account pending the lawsuits.
So how did a lot of the truckers feed themselves and get the fuel that they needed to keep going, to survive?
Canadians, Ottawa citizens, people, the donations that we received was unlike anything I've ever seen before. There was food, there was clothing, there was gloves, chapstick, dog food, baby formula. There was reefers full of donations from Canadians. And I'm not sure, Hal, if you ever had a chance to get to Ottawa during the convoy, but just about on every street corner, there was little kitchens set up, feeding people and feeding the homeless, and it was incredible.
We can't forget about the barbecues and the bouncy castles too, right?
That's right. The barbecues and the bouncy castles, yes.
Tamara, I'm sure it seems to many Canadians that the government used you as a focal point for their power and allegedly some of their vengeance. What powered you to keep going during your tough times in court and even jail?
God, for lack of a better word. I recognized after my arrest when I was in jail that it was thy will, not my will, and that there was obviously more work for me to do. I believe that the convoy itself ended up exposing things like the mainstream media and the banking system and, organizations like GoFundMe. And I felt that there was just more work that needed to be done. And I just put one foot in front of the other and trusted that I was going to be okay. And here I am, just fine.
So can you fill in our viewers where it stands right now? Are you still facing any charges?
Yeah, so our trial, Chris Barber and I, of course, are co-accused, and our trial is scheduled to start September the 5th in Ottawa. And so really looking forward to getting those charges dealt with, and hopefully everything stays on the timeline that we have as it sits right now.
And what are the charges? Did they tell you specifically?
Mischief, counseling to commit mischief, intimidation, I think is one, and counseling intimidation. And I want to say disobey a public order. And there's something else too. I can't remember.
Wow. Tamara, let me ask you something. Do you potentially see another Freedom Convoy in our future?
Not with me involved in it anyways. I'm
Why
still
not?
dealing with
Come
the
on.
first one.
You've got the
I'm still
experience.
dealing with the first one. Hal, I think the convoy was a once in a lifetime experience. I think it was a perfect storm of a bunch of different circumstances and events. And I don't know if we'll ever see that again in my lifetime.
Tamara Leach was one of the organizers of the Freedom Convoy. They captured the imaginations of so many around the world, and she joined us from Medicine Hat. Tamara, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Canada's energy sector continues to supply petrochemicals both here at home and around the world. In fact, there's nothing a consumer in this world purchases that is not thanks to oil and natural gas. As conversations of climate health and divesting of Canadian oil and gas holdings pop up, where are Canada's oil and gas resources and industries headed? Well, joining me from Calgary is Cody Battershill, founder of Canada Action. It's a volunteer-led, actually, grassroots movement encouraging Canadians to take action in support of the natural resources sectors of our nation. Cody, welcome to Bridge City News. Great to have you on today.
Hey, thanks for having me back. It's always great to be here.
Oh, well, appreciate that for sure. Well, this is such a big topic of conversation. And of course, I have to ask, how important is Canadian oil and gas on a world stage, Cody?
I mean, first and foremost, we all use oil and gas every day to stay alive, not just in transportation and heating, but also in fertilizer, also in all of the products that we use every day in our daily modern lives. So that at a fundamental level, it's all of our basic needs are assisted or facilitated through products and energy that's derived from oil and natural gas. On a global stage, we know that global oil and gas demand continues to grow. We know that Canada is a leader in reducing emissions, working with Indigenous communities, supporting human rights, and we need to be a part of the energy security calculation for our allies and trading partners globally so they can buy from Canada instead of buying from countries that aren't always reliable, don't always share our values, they may not be democracies. There's a whole host of other reasons, and it really just solidifies the importance, the significance. And as long as the world is using oil and natural gas, it should absolutely positively be coming from Canada.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and obviously we hear a lot of negatives, a lot about those negatives of Canada's oil and gas, but you've painted kind of a picture there of why you think the oil and gas industry deserves to be placed in a more positive light.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of negatives that are not the whole story. There's a lot of people that might be protesting. They might not have all the facts. Maybe they were misled by a group that's trying to shut down Canadian energy production. But those groups aren't talking about oil imports to Canada from countries like Saudi Arabia or Russia in the past decade or decades. They're not talking about oil tankers on the West Coast from Alaska. They're not talking about what would happen if we shut down Canadian oil and gas. And what would happen is a dramatic contraction in our economy, hundreds of thousands of families, millions of Canadians without employment, without livelihoods. And we would be immediately trying to build import facilities to replace locally produced oil and gas so that we did not all descend into chaos and anarchy as a society with no power, with no heat, with no food, with no plastics to keep our hospitals running. And there's so many more layers that we could peel back on the repercussions of that.
Yeah, absolutely, Cody. Now, one of the things that many people do appreciate about Canada Action, your organization, are your infographics. So one thing that caught our eye was about electric cars. So it says that if all the cars were electric by 2040, the world would demand for oil and gas. The world demand for oil and gas would actually be at 2013 levels. So maybe can you give a few more details about the worldwide demand for oil and natural gas?
Yeah, so when we talk about electric cars, it's important to think about how those cars are made. They're made from a lot of mining. They're made from a lot of advanced plastics and composites. The batteries are quite heavy, so the cars have to be as light as possible in every other part of their production, and that's oil and natural gas derived petrochemicals. And so even if the trajectory of electric vehicle growth continues as it's trending, we're still going to see robust oil demand. One study had said that oil demand would be around 90 million barrels a day. Another recent projection from the U.S. Energy and Information Administration said that in 2040, 2050, oil demand will still be about the level it is today. So even if it's not growing, that's still an Olympic-sized swimming pool of oil every 5-10 seconds that the globe is consuming. And yeah, let's support all energy sources and electric vehicles, but let's continue to support Canada's natural economic strengths. And a key part of that is oil and natural gas production that we do responsibly, and I would argue better than almost anywhere else in the world.
How can economies like those of Canada's provinces replace the economic benefits of our oil and gas industry?
Oil and natural gas is our number one export as a country. And when you look at Canada's exports, the vast majority of our top exports are natural resources. Thank a farmer, thank a forestry worker, thank a miner, thank an oil and gas worker, thank everyone who works in our grocery stores and our truck drivers, because all of these people work together to keep us living in our modern world the way that we are accustomed to. Very comfortable. Everything's at your fingertips. Everything's easy. And it wasn't always like that if we look back at history. And so we absolutely have to think about the massive economic benefits. One quick stat, from 2000 till 2032, there was a study that said the oil and natural gas industry would generate $1.1 trillion for our Canadian governments. And that's more than real estate and construction combined. And what does that government revenue pay for? Roads, schools, transit, clean technology initiatives, teachers, police officers, emergency responders. The basic fundamental foundation of our society as Canadians is what those government revenues fund. And so we have to be balanced, and I think as Canadians all work together to support all Canadian energy equally.
Okay, well, Cody, this list might be too long, but what products are made from petrochemicals? Can you maybe describe what our world would look like without oil and gas?
Well, I mean, Vaclav Smil is a great author, Bill Gates' favorite author, and he's a professor in Winnipeg at the university. And he says that the modern world is built on four fundamental materials, and that's cement, steel, ammonia, and plastic. And all of those require fossil fuels. And there's no immediate way today to switch out the fossil fuel components. Let's talk about ammonia and natural gas-based fertilizers. Currently, those fertilizers are feeding about half the world. we don't always think about how that fertilizer is made, but natural gas is a tremendous part of that. In Canada, in Alberta, when it's minus 40, what are we going to do for heat? What are we going to do for the plastics in hospitals? We start life in a hospital, and unfortunately, we often will end our lives in a hospital. Those plastics, those advanced materials are a fundamental part of modern medicine and our expanded lifetimes, life expectancies as humans in Canada and humans around the world. So, you know, when you look around your house, every single thing, everything you eat, everything you do, everything you own, everything you've ever done is made possible by natural resources. It's not always obvious, but oil and natural gas is a core component of everything we have, everything we do. Not just gasoline, not just plastics for the electric vehicle, but everything else I've detailed. It's incredibly important we have these more balanced conversations about this topic.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so when we think about all the modern gadgets that we have and even our utilities, what could possibly replace Canadian petrochemicals in our modern needs?
It would honestly be oil and gas imported from other countries. There's currently no substitute. So yeah, let's build wind and solar. Let's also maybe look at hydro and nuclear power. But we also are going to need oil and natural gas for a long time. There's no technology today to replace oil and natural gas in the world. And fossil fuels today are about 80% of global energy. It was about 85% 20 years ago. And it was about 90% 20 years before that. It goes to show you how long these things take. And in 20 years from now, it'll be maybe 75%. 75% of global energy with a growing global population. There's still about 3 billion people today that don't have either reliable electricity or any electricity at all, or clean cooking fuels. That's 3 billion people that would love to live like we live today here. So we got to have that global perspective, do all of the above. But oil and natural gas is going nowhere anytime soon. And anyone who tells you that is ignoring the reality, the physics, the science, and honestly, the positivity and the facts about Canadian oil and natural gas.
Interesting. And of course, there's all that talk of green barrels of energy. And maybe can you compare the difference between oil and gas extraction here in Canada versus other parts of the world?
Well, a big stat that we should all be celebrating is that emissions from Canadian oil and gas production actually peaked about 8 years ago. And since then, production is up 16%, but emissions are down 7%. Now, we are a global leader in monitoring our emissions, in working on land reclamation, in reducing water consumption, in collaborating as an industry to reduce all of those environmental impacts. Now, when you look at the world's top 10 oil exporters, we're talking about Saudi Arabia, Russia, the United States, Canada, Iraq, Iran, Nigeria, the UAE, Venezuela at one point, Mexico. There's all these other countries that are also we're competing with. When you look at all those countries, the top exporters, Canada is the #1 ranked country for different global indices like environmental sustainability from Yale and like the Women, Peace and Security Index and the Transparency Index through corruption's the Corruption Perception Index, which ranks transparency. We're #1 of those countries. You talk about social progress, you talk about human rights, you talk about democracy, you talk about all of these important values. The environment, yes, and emissions, yes, but also how do we treat people? How do we treat all people in our society? And that's also really important. Look at what's happening in Ukraine right now. Should we be buying from countries like that are invading countries, other countries, or should we be buying friendshoring? And that's what we've been hearing more and more about. So it is incredibly important that the world gain access to increased supply of Canadian oil and natural gas. We should make all other countries compete with us. Just like we want Team Canada to win the gold in hockey, Team Canadian Resources should be winning the gold in the competition globally to supply the growing global population and growing demand for natural resources.
We only have a couple minutes left here, but when we hear about pollution across the world, can you help put Canada's pollution output into perspective when compared to other nations or regions?
Yeah, and we got to talk. So we can talk about emissions, we can talk about land, we can talk about water. I think when we talk about one quick stat regarding emissions would be that we are actually a global leader in reducing methane and flaring from our oil and gas industry. So there's a study done by the U of C that said if the rest of the world copied our standards, the average emissions from barrel of oil would reduce by 23%, oil production, the upstream production emissions. That's about taking 100 million cars off the road. And if we want to talk right now about reducing global impacts, getting as much Canadian liquefied natural gas to Asia and the world will absolutely have the largest immediate impact on reducing global emissions. That's climate action today. Canadian natural gas, more Canadian oil. We rank incredibly well. I mean, Calgary, Toronto, and Vancouver over the last many years have been three of the world's top most livable places to live, some of the world's cleanest cities. We know that we have an incredibly strong consensus at a national level that we care about the environment. We also care about supporting our families, and we need to care more about having the maximum positive impact on the global trade, global security, and that's Canadian oil and natural gas and wind and solar and. It's all of the above. And people that are saying shut it down are ignoring the reality of how they live, how we live, the impacts, and the massive global positives that Canadian oil and natural gas brings.
All right, Cody, it looks like we are out of time, but thanks so much for joining us today and for sharing your perspective.
It's such a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. My pleasure. Thank you. Cody Battershill is the founder of Canada Action, a volunteer-led movement encouraging Canadians to take action in support of the natural resources sector of our nation. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.